The government has shifted its position on whether there should be new inquiries in the UK into child grooming gangs. On today's episode of Newscast, the BBC's daily news podcast, we will ask whether Elon Musk, the billionaire owner of the social network X, is responsible for it. Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio, and shortly I'll be joined by BBC legend Lyse Doucet as we get the latest on the ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas over the war in Gaza. And the implementation of that deal is maybe not going quite as smoothly as some people suggested. Sounds like there's a few sticking points. And also there has still been further military action by Israel in Gaza, because even the ceasefire, once it is agreed, does not kick in until Sunday. But first of all, we're going to talk about why the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, was saying this in the House of Commons today, as she announced a raft of new measures and investigations into child grooming gangs in the UK.
But in order to go much further, I have asked Baroness Louise Casey to oversee a rapid audit of the current scale and nature of gang-based exploitation across the country and to make recommendations on the further work that is needed. The specific 2022 ICSA report, Independent Inquiry Report on gang exploitation, concluded that an accurate picture of the prevalence of child sexual exploitation could not be gleaned from the data and evidence that it had available. So this audit will seek to fill that gap.
So it's an audit, not an inquiry, and there's national support for local inquiries. So there's quite a lot to get our head round, but luckily one of the BBC's experts was watching Yvette Cooper's statement, and she's here now. It's the BBC's social affairs editor, Alison Holt. Hello, Alison.
Hello.
And Henry Zeffman is not at Westminster, he's here in the studio. Hello.
Hi, pleasure to be here.
Henry, when did you get the sense that actually something was afoot in terms of what the Home Office was doing?
A few hours before Yvette Cooper's statement was when I had a sense that Yvette Cooper was going to do something today. But over the last few days, and look, to be clear, I'm not claiming that I would have predicted this today because I wouldn't have, but over the past few days, Labour MPs I speak to regularly who just last week were adamant that there should be no concession on this issue, not on some of the emotions and the issues around the issue, but on the specific issue of a new inquiry of some sort. They just started to soften that position in the past few days. I think a lot of MPs had spent time with constituents over the weekend and discovered that while it is not the top issue in many of their constituencies, it is something that some of their actual voters, people who back the Labour Party, are concerned about and are asking them for more action on. And you just sort of started to sense the political sands shifting a bit.
Right, Alison, you've got your notepad there and you were saying that there's 11 things you wrote down from what...
Well, that I've managed to count. There may be more
than that, but there are 11 key things. I mean, what are the key things within those 11? Where should we start?
So let's start with the government saying that it's going to set out a clear timetable for taking forward the 20 recommendations from the final report of the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse, a real mouthful. They want to do that before Easter. They also want to implement recommendations from a standalone report into grooming that the inquiry did. There will be 5 local inquiries looking into grooming gangs, including in Oldham. And what they're going to try and do there is set up a framework which they say should be victim-led and locally driven, but it will be backed by government.
Oh, so what does that mean, backed by government?
Well, they're going to put Tom Crowther KC, who led the inquiry, the local inquiry in Telford that happened into grooming. He is going to have oversight on these and be there to support them. And I think the idea is that they come up with some sort of framework which works, that gets the answers for victims and survivors of abuse. It also allows for people to be held accountable. There are lots of things we don't know about it. I mean, will people be compelled to give evidence? But
what powers will these local inquiries have? And Henry, is that different or the same, or halfway between a national inquiry and a local inquiry? A series of local inquiries that are backed at a national level.
Well, and a lot of the debate about whether there should be a new inquiry has hinged upon the fact that actually an inquiry has a very specific meaning in the UK. There is such a thing as a statutory inquiry, which has certain powers underpinned by law to compel witnesses to appear. And we've seen all sorts of national inquiries. You know, there are several going on at the moment and they take time. people involved get lawyers, the inquiries have counsel, and one of the arguments that people in government were putting forth last week against a new national inquiry is just, hang on, it would take so much time, when actually what so many of the victims they speak to say they want is urgent action, not more delay before more recommendations that then take some time to be implemented. I think the risk for the government is that in trying to win the argument and make their case about speed, they may end up in a position where they lose the confidence of some of the people who've been pushing for another inquiry with a lowercase I, because of that inability potentially to compel witnesses. Though I think we're still not actually clear what the final position is on whether it will be able to compel witnesses as we record now.
But we can hear a bit of the criticism that came Yvette Cooper's way from Chris Philp, who is the Shadow Home Secretary.
Thousands of young girls, often in their early teens, were systematically raped by gangs of men, predominantly of Pakistani heritage. Those in positions of authority, the police, local councils, the CPS, ignored them, and in some cases even covered up these horrendous crimes because of absurd concerns about so-called cultural sensitivity. 10 days ago, the Prime Minister compounded this by saying it was a far-right bandwagon to raise these issues and call for a proper inquiry. Let me say this, it is not far-right to stand up for rape victims, and smearing those who raise this issue is exactly what led to the victims.
Order, order. The Shadow Home Secretary will be heard. Shadow Home Secretary.
Smearing those who raise this is exactly what led to the victims being ignored and the crimes covered up in the first place.
And that last bit there of Chris Philps referring to Keir Starmer saying the people calling for an inquiry were allying themselves with the far right. I mean, people have pretty much accepted that was a bit of a misstep by Keir Starmer when he said that. Even Keir Starmer himself has walked back from that line.
Well, I think his argument is that it was a misunderstanding more than it was a misstep. I mean, look, if you're the Prime Minister and people are misunderstanding what you say, then that's a comms problem anyway. But he says he never said that it was a far-right issue, but that some people who should have known better were jumping onto a bandwagon which some people on the far right were involved with. So, yeah, a bit hard to sort of explain, and that maybe was part of his problem. I mean, this is a change of position from the government. I think we should be quite clear about that. This was not what was being suggested privately but also publicly by the Prime Minister when in that first speech he gave, which was meant to be about the NHS, the first Monday back at the start of last week, when he had prepared remarks for the inevitable questions about Elon Musk. And while he absolutely expressed deep concern about this issue and talked about his record combating it as Director of Public Prosecutions, there was no suggestion then that the government was going to end up
doing something different,
coordinating these local inquiries. I mean, they did always say that they would back local inquiries, but this sort of nationally mandated local inquiries with this extra national rapid review laid on top with Louise Casey, it is clear that they've moved on this. And by the way, I know it's not the focus today, we should not lose sight of the fact there is no chance Yvette Cooper would have been standing up in the House of Commons saying this today if Elon Musk hadn't taken an interest in it at some point over the Christmas period. And that remains an extraordinary and unusual fact that I just think we need to continue to reflect on, because it could well be heralding, I think, a whole new way in which our information and political systems interact.
Although the difficulty we have saying that conclusively is that, okay, Reform and the Conservative Party and GB News were campaigning on this, and we don't know what would have happened if Elon Musk hadn't joined in. Do you think they together wouldn't have been able to get this over the line?
Yeah, I'm very confident in saying that. And they've been campaigning on it to different degrees. So I think the very original genesis of this bit of the story was a scoop from GB News, which was the letter that Jess Phillips, in her capacity as safeguarding...
so a story rather than a campaign, I should say.
Yeah, but that was then picked up by Elon Musk. And then Reform Sure have been talking about this with different degrees of prominence for a while. The Conservative Party haven't been calling for a new national inquiry before 2025. I mean, Kemi Badenoch acknowledged today when she was asked about this, that, she says, well, actually, yeah, maybe they should have done more in government. So, they were in government quite recently. I do think this debate has been moved on substantially, even if it's just catalysing something that might have happened anyway. I think there's an argument for that, but I'm a bit sceptical. I think Elon Musk has done that.
And Alison, there's a bit that we haven't talked about yet that's on your list of things that Yvette Cooper announced. Henry's alluded to it, which is the actual national level thing, which Baroness Lyse Casey is going to do. What is that?
She's going to do a rapid audit of existing evidence around the scale of the problem of grooming gangs. So she will pull together existing data. But there's also one of the things they've announced, which is very interesting, is they're going to try and gather much better data. So from now on, there will be a push to gather the information that can tell us who tend to form grooming gangs, where are the areas, is there a particular pattern, or is it actually just at the moment a question of where we've been looking. So it's information that can inform a wider debate. I should also say, I've been speaking to a lot of survivor groups in the last week, and there's this mix of frustration, but also a recognition that this has put an important issue on the agenda in the last week. It's put it up the political agenda, because what they're saying is that many of them are saying they want to see the recommendations of the independent inquiry where, 7,000 people gave evidence. They want to see those recommendations brought in. The feeling was that a lot of it had been pushed into the long grass, and the worry was, will anything happen quickly enough? Well, clearly we've got much more speed now. It's got attention, but they say that attention needs to be on what the views are of those who've experienced abuse, what they say, and the people who work with them say.
And so just to be clear, what Lyse Casey, or Baroness Casey to give her proper title, is looking at is going to look at the race of people involved in these cases.
Among other things, she's going to get the information. So one of the factors she'll look at will be ethnicity and cultural drivers. It will also pull together information from police forces. They've been asked to look at their data. I should say about Baroness Lyse Casey, she is a very busy woman.
Well, yes.
She is due to start in April her inquiry into the future of adult social care.
Which is the other half of your job.
Yeah, exactly. I've spent a lot of time talking about that. And I think that there will be a little bit of, well, certainly some raised eyebrows from the social care sector, who were hoping that she would be spending the next few months engaging with them and looking at issues, for instance, over how quickly she will make her recommendations for future funding. Obviously, she's now got another very big, important job.
And do we know how Baroness Casey's going to do her multitasking, Henry?
I should say she's also, in the last couple of weeks, been appointed as the lead non-executive director in government, which might sound... Well, no, sorry. Does sound quite technical and boring, but is another big role because every government department has a group of non-executive directors who are meant to oversee the work of the department, and she's now in charge of all of them, which is a measure of the esteem in which she's held. She's done. She was a civil servant. She's done various inquiries of different sorts, and is seen as sort of straight-talking and straight to the point. She did a brilliant series, which is on BBC Sounds, maybe a year or so ago, or maybe a bit more than that, about various sort of intractable problems in British public policy. But no, I don't know how she's going to balance all of that, other than that clearly Keir Starmer and his people invest superhuman talents in her, so I'm sure she has them.
I mean, she is pretty superhuman when you meet her. I think what Yvette Cooper was saying is that Baroness Casey will spend 3 months doing this rapid review, and that's why it's a rapid, the emphasis being on rapid, and then she starts...
And the social care review is long, much to the disappointment of some of the people.
Yeah, she's got 3 years to finish that, so I think that's how they're doing it. Alison, you mentioned the word accountability, and this is where you realise how things are just getting a little bit complicated now. People will be looking at these cases, and I'm sure some people will feel that maybe some counsellors should be prosecuted for not doing their jobs properly and failing children. Is there anything in this package that's been announced today that might see a counsellor prosecuted, going to court, being named and shamed for doing a bad job and failing children?
Well, they're talking about the plans that already exist for a duty of candour. I don't know the details of that, exactly how it would work and how it would work in relation to this. But I think one of the suggestions is that will lead to greater accountability. And I think also scrutiny and the gathering of data will help with that accountability. I also imagine that the framework that they're putting forward for local inquiries is meant to help with that. But we've still got so much information we need about how these things will work in practice.
And just to end this bit of the conversation, these locally led but nationally supported 5 inquiries, we don't know all the areas, all 5 yet. But the idea is that this provides a sort of template that then other local authorities, if they kind of put their hand up and say, we need some help to do this, they can then take that template and there might be some central government money to help them.
Well, they're describing them as pilots. So the suggestion is that they will come up with some sort of framework which they could use in future possible inquiries.
Now, Henry, I notice you've chosen your language carefully and you haven't said U-turn, because a lot of people will be reaching for that cliche to describe what the government's done today. And I know you haven't reached for it. And obviously that's because you would never use a cliche.
Exactly.
Because you're a good
took the words
broadcaster.
right off my mouth.
But how have you chosen the words you've used to describe it? This is the media studies bit of this episode.
I actually don't think, if we were to go in for the cliche, I don't think it's a full U-turn because it is not a national statutory inquiry into grooming gangs. But I do think it is a significant change of position, and it is far from the most important element of this very important story and this very harrowing issue. But I think some Labour MPs will add this to the file that is growing by the day for some of them about Keir Starmer getting his initial political judgments about issues and where they are going a little bit off.
Well, yeah, because this then gives ammo to people who want other decisions reversed. Like if you're really, really angry about winter fuel payments being taken away from all but the poorest pensioners, you could then say, well, hang on, you change your mind about inquiries about child sexual exploitation. Why is that worthy of a change of position? And pensioners getting cold isn't.
Yeah,
that's why changes of positions can be corrosive for leaders.
Absolutely. The counter argument is that knowing when to change a position is a sign of political strength rather than political intransigence, but it's a fine balance. And as always with these things, there's a risk of the narrative kind of wagging the tail of the dog. God, that is talk about not cliches. That is an awful mixed metaphor.
Just to be clear, Henry's been up since 4 o'clock this morning and it's 4 p.m.
But my point is, the point I was trying to make, and I'm now going to try to make more eloquently, is when a prime minister is doing well, often every decision they make gets shoehorned into the narrative that they're doing well. And when they're doing badly, and I think even his supporters would admit Keir Starmer has had a rough period, then everything becomes part of that narrative. So, we should be wary of that and see how these local inquiries and the national review develop and whether they actually do the job that he's trying to do here, which is staunch both the political sore and address what is a very real concern for lots of people, notwithstanding the fact that it was generated a bit in this iteration by Elon Musk.
And I should just say, as we're recording this episode at 4:50 on Thursday afternoon, Elon Musk did post on X a little while ago. He reposted the Home Office post announcing this action plan. And he then has put his own comment on it saying, I hope this is a proper investigation. Now, I'm going to make a massive hostage to fortune here, talking about journalistic cliches. That to me seems a much more kind of moderate response from Elon Musk than some of the stuff he was posting on X over the last couple of weeks. So I wonder if actually that this is the end of one chapter and the start of another, which has got a kind of different tone to it.
Well, and come Monday, he's going to be part of the US government. So talk about Lyse Doucet.
Is he part of the government? Because Doge is sort of not
adjacent to.
It's
almost like being a lead non-executive director. Actually, maybe him and
are you comparing Lyse Casey and Elon Musk
to compare notes?
Well, Baroness Casey does listen to Newscast.
So and now
she's pleased with that comparison. She knows to WhatsApp us on 0330 123 9480. Henry, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
And Alison, thanks to you too.
Thanks.
And now BBC Chief International Correspondent Lyse Doucet is joining us in the Newscast studio because we wanted to catch up with all the developments that have been since Qatar announced that Israel and Hamas had reached a ceasefire agreement made up of 3 different phases for the war in Gaza. That all happened on Wednesday afternoon, Wednesday evening. We did quite a big episode about it on Wednesday night, but there was still lots of unanswered questions about how the deal would actually be implemented and actually at what point Israel would approve it. The Israeli cabinet would approve it. So we can catch up with all of that now as we record this portion of Newscast at about 5 p.m. on Thursday with Lyse. Hello.
So good to see you, Adam.
A busy week, yeah.
Busy week. A week where we have to focus on very big, momentous developments, but also the little details of these this great sweep of history. So it's been a really, really important, fascinating time, and with rare hope and happiness, which is, we don't often get to see when we're covering the Middle East.
And also the Israeli hostages haven't been returned yet, so those reunions will be quite something to watch when they start happening in a couple of days.
I was on a program yesterday with a man named Moshe, whose brother-in-law is one of the last. They say there's 98 left. About 36 are believed to be dead, and you could feel his agony. That it was, of course, happiness mixed with anxiety because the men, the young men, the male soldiers, will not be released in the first phase of the deal, and so if the process breaks down after the first of the hostages, the women, the civilians, the children are released, it means that his cautious hope will come to nothing. So they're not allowing themselves yet to be too hopeful because they have been let down so many times before. How many times we've sat here before, Adam, and said they're 90% done. We're closer than we ever before. There is a deal. And we understand that the last minute snags have been now sorted. It will go to the Israeli Security Cabinet and the full cabinet tomorrow. But there's still a lot that could go wrong.
And we'll talk about the machinations in a second, but I suppose also talking about the emotional dimension, we'll also see the sight of Gazans returning to their homes, which don't really exist anymore. And that's going to happen on a massive scale. And of course, that will be pictures that come to us from people in Gaza because we're still, as journalists, not allowed to go there.
I was listening to some Palestinians from Gaza speaking on the BBC just before I joined you, Adam. And the same people who'd been celebrating with joy in the streets were crying in the dark because after this explosion of relief that finally the war was going to end, then the bombardment started and more people were killed. More houses were destroyed. As Israel says, it's targeting terrorists and civilians. The civilians are there as well, and there are some more than 70 have been killed since the announcement that there was a deal. So they feel let down. They feel that they don't have the luxury of hoping until it is done. It is done. And yes, to say they're going to be able to go home, most of them have no homes left. It is just a pile of rubble. So many Palestinians who sought refuge in the south of the Gaza Strip were forced to evacuate under Israeli orders, and many of whom, and we've heard them on the BBC, were pushed as many as 10 times from tent to tent. They haven't seen their mother, they haven't hugged their mother, their father, for the last 15 months. And
it's millions and millions of people.
Well, there's more, more than a million, yes. And bittersweet. And of course, this is really a deal where it's going to be lived day by day in a roller coaster of emotion. It is a very long road to a different future for Israelis and Palestinians. It has huge, not just rocks on the road, but huge boulders and diversions. But the most important thing, Adam, is that at long last they are embarking on this road. And the first stretches, the first tarmac, seems to be quite smooth. That first 6 weeks could go well.
Except you were hinting at some issues with actually signing the deal in Israel. What's going on there?
So we were expecting today, and you may have discussed it yesterday on the program, that once the announcement was made in Qatar by Qatar's prime minister, who's also the foreign minister, who's played a very key role in the mediation, along with senior Egyptians and senior Americans, he announced the deal. But perhaps in less loud voice, he said, "Yeah, well, there's a few little details that have to be sorted out." We got conflicting reports all through today, which led to the cabinet meeting, the meeting of the cabinets for final approval on the Israeli side to be held. Israel immediately blamed Hamas and said that Hamas was trying to put new prisoners' names on the list at the 11th hour, trying to sneak some in, even though the list had already been agreed. Just before I joined you, there's a report in Arab media that said that Prime Minister Netanyahu, the Israeli side, also tried to put names on the list. We don't have the full story yet. Perhaps it's in the nature of the beast in terms of these highly complex and deeply politicized, very emotional peace processes. I can't call it a peace process, a ceasefire and a hostage release, that there are things that can go wrong at the very last minute, that people will try to seize advantage, can have a wobble, have final thoughts. Then, of course, we've seen some of the military activity is continuing. But all eyes now are on midday Sunday, Adam, where the first of the hostages, there's been reports it could be 3, could be 5 female Israeli soldiers. There were talks before it could be the children. There's great anticipation of that because it was said that some of the children were dead. So it will be a very emotional day.
And just in terms of Israeli politics, I'm not clear just how much Netanyahu relies on his very right-wing allies to stay in power, because you hear some people saying, oh, there's 2 people from the far right who could torpedo this whole thing in Israel and basically have him thrown out of office. But then other people saying, no, he's managed to broaden his, not necessarily his government, but his base of support. That means he's not so reliant on them anymore. What's your take?
Yes, Mr. Smotrich, the finance minister, and also the Itamar Ben-Gvir, who is the national security minister, both of them have been very public, denouncing this agreement. It's catastrophic. All the way through this process, they've been adamant that this war must continue until Hamas is destroyed, which is what Prime Minister Netanyahu has said. In fact, Itamar Ben-Gvir in the last 2 days has basically come out and boasted that he has stopped a deal from being done many times before. And we do understand President Biden has said the deal that's basically been signed was the one that was put on the table in May. But it has had many obstacles on the way, including from Hamas, which had its own red lines. What we understand, Adam, is that while they are vowing to stop the deal, they cannot. There is a big enough majority in the Security Cabinet and the broader cabinet for this to go through. We don't know whether they will carry out their threat to bring down the government. It was always said, and this is constantly in Israeli media, that Prime Minister Netanyahu does not want to bring down his government. He doesn't want to end the war because there will be a reckoning and he will have to answer questions about this huge intelligence failure, which allowed this atrocious Hamas attacks to actually take place on October the 7th in 2023. But there has been some discussion that they may be persuaded to stay on because they realize that this new administration, the Trump administration, has a team which talks in the language that they do. They don't talk, for example, the man who's to become Mike Huckabee, who is nominated to be the new U.S. ambassador to Israel. He says, I don't talk about the West Bank. He uses the biblical name Judea and Samaria. He also would be amenable to the annexation of the West Bank. And there are other members of President Trump's team who think the same. And so there may be an administration that the far right will not have difficulties with. Although I think that there's also been some discussion about how they didn't expect this kind of pressure. They're now thinking, oh, President Trump's team or President-elect Trump's team is pushing us into this deal, and we thought they would not. So, and I think Prime Minister Netanyahu is very aware. He got used to dealing with President Biden and was able to duck and dive. President Trump is different. He basically says, do it. And if you don't, there's consequences. There's hell to pay, as he said it, to Hamas. But it also applies to Israel. So we don't think they can stop the deal. we will see. They may wait to the second phase to see, and there is discussion. What is Prime Minister Netanyahu saying to them behind closed doors? Let's get started. We can restart the war later. There's a get out clause, if you like. What the Qatari, the Americans, the Egyptian mediators, what certainly the Arab leaders, what Palestinians will hope, and many Israelis will hope, there'll be enough pressure there'll be a momentum once the process starts to keep this going. And as we've seen in the Middle East, and we didn't have to be reminded, a day is a long time in this conflict. It's been, the past 15 months have been, to use the word that defines, is unprecedented in every way.
And I'm just thinking what's interesting about the timing is that after we'd recorded Newscast last night at about kind of 9 o'clock-ish UK time, we'd seen Biden's statement flanked by Kamala Harris and Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State. Then a few hours later, he was in the Oval Office doing his sort of goodbye address to the American people. But actually, in news terms, his goodbye address to the world was his statement about Gaza. That's the full stop to his presidency. People didn't pay as much attention to his own version of his own record like this.
And he spent most of it warning about the dangers to democracy, that there were these oligarchs who were taking home, people, a small group of men with a lot of power and money were taking over. So that also was quite unusual, that usually that is a moment for them to reflect on their successes. But he had sounded rang a lot of bells, warning bells, about which he did throughout his election campaign until he pulled out of the election campaign and even before the campaign, had warned about the threats to democracy, about the threats to the United States. But it's almost there. It's almost the 20th. So it's not a coincidence that this deal is supposed to start the 19th. So Trump is now saying, hey, I'm not even president, and look what I'm able to do. That also was unprecedented. The two administrations, not just working together, sitting at the same table. It's never happened before.
Well, Lyse, thanks for sitting at our table today.
Yes. I think if we sit here too long, something else might happen, Adam. So we better end our conversation.
Get back to your phone. I'll get back to my laptop. Thank you very much. And that's all for this episode of Newscast. Thank you to everyone who's been on it. And thanks to you two for listening. We'll be back with another one very soon. Bye-bye.